The royal door did not just close. It was locked from the inside with a titanium deadbolt, and the key has been dissolved in a vat of industrial acid where no amount of tears, Netflix contracts, or PR campaigns can ever retrieve it. Have you ever wondered what happens when a monarchy finally runs out of patience and decides that an apology is no longer worth the paper it's printed on? Well, you are about to find out, because the ultimate Shahi earthquake has just rattled the palace gates, and the aftershocks are currently flattening the hills of Montecito. Princess Anne did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Standing before a stunned gathering of senior royal officials, she placed one polished hand on the table, leaned into the light, and leaked a permanent protocol change capable of vaporizing Meghan Markle's remaining royal ambitions forever. The instruction was precise, cold, and already active. A total, irreversible ban from every official royal event on the calendar. We are talking state ceremonies, balcony appearances, family gatherings, and palace receptions. Completely scrubbed. Her name will no longer even wait for approval. It gets systematically filtered out before the invitation list even touches King Charles's desk. It is a calculated chess move designed to survive family hesitation, guilt, or any late-night emotional phone calls. Before we dissect how this ruthless new boundary will rewrite royal history and push Prince Harry to his absolute limit, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss another absolute jaw-dropper. And has spoken, the gates are shut, and the ultimate battle for loyalty has officially begun. The smoke has barely cleared from that boardroom briefing, and the true scale of what Princess Anne has just executed is starting to send shivers down the spines of palace insiders and Hollywood publicists alike. To fully understand why the House of Windsor decided to deploy their most no-nonsense weapon, the Princess Royal herself, we have to look at the sheer mountain of exhaustion that built up to this precise moment. This is not just a minor disagreement over seating arrangements or who gets to wear what tiara at a state dinner. This is the final, definitive cutting of a constitutional umbilical cord. For years, the palace tried the diplomatic route, employing the classic royal strategy of smiling through the teeth while the institution was systematically dismantled in primetime interviews, multi-million-dollar documentary series, and tell-all memoirs that left no stone unturned and no reputation unvarnished. The establishment has watched silently as private family texts were transformed into global entertainment commodities, and every single olive branch extended from London was promptly converted into weaponized content back in California. But every institution, no matter how ancient or deeply steeped in the tradition of keeping a stiff upper lip, has a breaking point, and Meghan Markle just managed to find the exact boundary where family sentiment ends and state survival begins. The whispers behind the velvet curtains suggest that the catalyst for this unprecedented leak was an absolute masterclass in boundary pushing that finally pushed the normally stoic Princess Anne over the edge. According to highly placed, deeply embedded palace deep throats who speak only under the strictest conditions of anonymity, the latest round of behind-the-scenes demands from the Montecito camp made the previous controversies look like a polite Sunday afternoon tea party. It turns out that a series of heavily encrypted, highly demanding proposals had been quietly filtering through the palace communications channels for weeks, outlining a spectacular strategic return to the royal stage. The plan, which insiders are calling the ultimate manifestation of supreme audacity, laid out a list of prerequisites for any future appearances at major state ceremonies that would have effectively rewritten centuries of established protocol, just to accommodate a single individual's personal brand. We are talking about demands for independent, non-pooled media access, a guaranteed secondary entrance to bypass the senior working royals, and a level of specialized security that would require its own separate budget approval from the Home Office. It was a clear, calculated attempt to enjoy all the high-wattage visibility of the crown without carrying out a single day of tedious, unglamorous public service in a rainy town square. When the documentation finally landed on the desk of the Princess Royal, who famously carries out hundreds of engagements a year without a single complaint or a specialized lighting crew, the response was not an emotional outburst, but a cold, administrative execution. And reportedly took one look at the proposed terms, balanced her reading glasses on her nose, and realized that the policy of temporary compromises had failed completely because every single concession was being used as a stepping stone for the next demand. She recognized that the monarchy was effectively being forced into a position of constant renegotiation before every single doorway opened, turning national moments of reflection and celebration into chaotic media circuses focused entirely on one woman's public visibility. The decision to completely alter the underlying architecture of the palace invitation system was not done out of malice, but out of a clinical need for institutional self-preservation. This new, deeply embedded protocol completely bypasses the traditional channels of emotional blackmail, ensuring that no matter how much guilt or family pressure is applied to King Charles during a late-night transatlantic phone call, the machinery of the palace will simply say no. The system has been coded to be entirely automated and merciless. When an invitation list for a major state event is generated by the Lord Chamberlain's office, the software itself filters out any names that do not possess active, recognized constitutional duties. This means Meghan's name is blocked long before any human eyes even review the list, removing the burden of rejection from the king's shoulders and placing it squarely on the unyielding shoulders of palace procedure. When the certified letters detailing this permanent structural shift finally arrived in Montecito, via a secure diplomatic courier, the atmosphere inside the mansion apparently shifted from smug anticipation to pure, unadulterated shock. Sources close to the Duchess claim she stopped completely dead in her tracks halfway across her expansive, pristine living room, staring at the stark, unyielding text of the official document as the absolute finality of the words began to sink in. She had spent years mastering the art of public relations warfare, confident that the royal family's fear of bad press and accusations of insensitivity would always force them to leave a back door open for future negotiations. She had fully expected a standard, bureaucratic pushback, perhaps a polite rejection hidden behind some vague excuse about seating limitations or security logistical difficulties, but she had never, in her wildest dreams, anticipated a permanent, structural deletion from the fabric of the institution. The document made it explicitly clear that this was not a temporary suspension or a probationary period that could be salvaged by a well-timed public apology or a highly publicized charitable initiative in the future. This was a permanent, constitutional eviction notice from the public stage of the British state, applicable to everything from solemn memorial services to historic balcony appearances, rendering any future family appeals or public relations campaigns completely useless against the automated gears of palace planning. The sheer clinical coldness of the delivery was what truly stung, proving that the palace had finally learned how to play the game on their own terms, using the weight of their ancient system to crush any lingering ambitions of royal visibility, without ever having to engage in a public mudslinging match. Harry was reportedly notified via a separate, highly private channel just moments before the official internal documentation was circulated among the senior household staff, and his immediate reaction was one of profound, boiling betrayal. He had spent his entire life watching his aunt, Princess Anne, operate as the ultimate iron pillar of his family, a woman who valued duty above all else, but who had always maintained a quiet, unspoken understanding of his own unique struggles within the system. To discover that she was not just a supporter of this draconian new measure, but the actual architect who had personally pushed it through the constitutional meat grinder, was a psychological blow that left him completely reeling. He walked over to the window of his study, staring out at the manicured California landscape, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper, as he demanded to know if his aunt had truly been the face behind this final, unbreakable barrier. The realization that the palace had successfully separated his personal status as the king's son from his wife's status as a permanent outsider was the ultimate realization of his worst fears, proving that the institution had officially decoupled family affection from state responsibility. King Charles, meanwhile, was left to read the finalized protocol summary in the profound, suffocating silence of his private study, a monarch caught between the unyielding demands of an ancient crown and the agonizing, instinctive love of a wounded father. He removed his reading glasses, placing them with a heavy, deliberate click onto the polished mahogany desk, his eyes staring blankly at the signature lines that transformed a brutal institutional proposal into a binding state order. He understood with absolute clarity why his sister, Anne, and his eldest son, William, had demanded this level of permanent, unbending certainty, recognizing that the constant, Recurring battles over guest lists and seating charts were actively draining the authority of the monarchy during a time when it needed stability more than ever. Yet, as a parent, he could see another massive, unscalable wall rising directly between himself and his younger son. Knowing that Harry would never be able to separate the clinical actions of the institution from the personal choices of the family, and had tried to shield her brother from this exact emotional agony, offering to take the full, unfiltered brunt of Harry's inevitable fury, so that the king could remain technically untainted by the appearance of personal cruelty. But the signature on the document was the king's own, and as the ink dried on the parchment, the reality of what had just been set in motion began to ripple outward through the corridors of power, setting the stage for a public and private fallout that no one was truly prepared to handle. The initial test of this automated rejection system happened almost immediately behind closed doors during the preliminary planning phases for 3 major, upcoming international royal gatherings. Palace planners, acting under strict instructions from the top, ran the new protocol software through a series of mock invitation trials to ensure there were no technical loopholes or administrative escape hatches that could be exploited by clever lawyers or desperate public relations managers. Each time Meghan's name was entered into the system as a potential guest under the category of family relation, the screen flashed with a brilliant, red administrative block, instantly rerouting the entry to a permanent exclusion folder, and deleting any associated requests for state security or official transport. It was a terrifyingly efficient display of bureaucratic power that proved the old ways of doing business at Buckingham Palace were officially dead and buried. The system didn't care about past royal status, it didn't care about Hollywood popularity metrics, and it certainly didn't care about the potential for explosive tabloid headlines the next morning. It only cared about active, sworn allegiance to the public service of the crown, a criteria that Meghan had famously walked away from when she flew across the Atlantic to pursue global celebrity status. As the finality of this realization settled over the senior courtiers, the focus instantly shifted to the inevitable storm that was currently brewing across the ocean, where the silence from California was growing louder by the minute, signaling that the first true counter-strike in this historic war of wills was already being prepared behind closed doors. The administrative red light flashing on those palace computers was the silent opening salvo in a constitutional war that was about to spill into the public arena with devastating force. While the automated software in London was busy scrubbing every trace of the Duchess from future state guest lists, the mansion in Montecito was transforming into a high-stakes war room where the initial shock was rapidly hardening into a calculated, furious strategy. Meghan was not a woman to accept a clinical, computerized eviction notice from the British state without pulling out every single public relations weapon in her considerable arsenal. The silence emanating from their California estate was not a sign of submission. It was the quiet before a meticulously planned media typhoon designed to make the palace regret the very day they let Princess and take the steering wheel of the monarchy's legal apparatus. According to deep-level Hollywood fixers and public relations operatives who have been caught in the crossfire of this unfolding drama, the immediate aftermath of that document's arrival was pure chaos. Meghan reportedly spent 48 hours straight huddled with a specialized team of crisis managers, legal consultants, and high-powered digital strategists, analyzing the exact wording of the palace protocol shift to find any loose thread they could pull. The fact that Princess Anne had personally overseen the leak was viewed by the Montecito camp not as a legitimate exercise in institutional boundary setting, but as a deeply personal, targeted vendetta masked as neutral administrative policy. The narrative being crafted behind closed doors in California was simple yet potentially explosive. They were going to frame this permanent exclusion as a cruel, systemic act of institutional bullying designed to alienate a mother from her husband's heritage and cast her children into a permanent royal exile. To make matters worse for the palace, the financial stakes tied to this sudden protocol shift were astronomical, sending shockwaves through the executive boardrooms of major streaming platforms and publishing houses that had invested hundreds of millions of dollars in the Sussex brand. The harsh reality of global celebrity economics is that the commercial value of the Montecito couple is inextricably linked to their proximity to the British crown. A temporary feud is highly profitable because it creates suspense, drama, and the constant anticipation of a grand public reconciliation at the next major royal milestone. But a permanent structural deletion, an absolute, unyielding no coded into the very software of the state, acts as a commercial death sentence for a brand built on royal association. If Meghan is barred from the balcony, excluded from the state dinners, and filtered out of the historic memorial services, she is no longer a glamorous global royal. She is simply a former actress living in California, stripped of the very mystique that made her a primetime commodity. Realizing that their entire commercial empire was facing a massive existential threat, the California team launched a multi-pronged, behind-the-scenes counter-offensive aimed directly at the weakest link in the palace chain: King Charles's paternal guilt. Sources inside the palace household leak that Harry was instructed to bypass the formal channels entirely, ignoring the private secretaries and constitutional advisors who had constructed this unyielding fortress around the monarch. He reportedly launched a barrage of direct, late-night phone calls to his father's private line, his voice thick with a mixture of raw anger and deep emotional exhaustion as he demanded to know how a father could allow his own sister to systematically erase his wife from the family history. Harry reportedly warned the king that if this permanent protocol was not immediately frozen or subjected to a formal review, he would completely pull the plug on any future personal communications, ensuring that Charles would never see his grandchildren in person again. The emotional blackmail was calculated to hit the king at a moment of extreme physical and psychological vulnerability, and for a brief, terrifying moment, the fortress of palace procedure began to wobble. King Charles, enduring the heavy burdens of an aging monarch under constant public scrutiny, was reportedly reduced to tears during one particularly brutal transatlantic confrontation, desperately searching for some sort of middle ground that would satisfy his family while maintaining the stability of the state. He approached Princess Anne in a state of deep distress, asking if they could introduce a 5-year expiry date on the restriction, or perhaps create a special, non-public dispensation that would allow Meghan to attend private family memorial services without the presence of the media. It was the exact moment of hesitation that the system had been built to withstand, the predictable crack in the paternal armor that had allowed the royal family to be manipulated into constant compromises for the past several years. But Princess Anne stood before her brother with the unyielding solidity of a constitutional mountain, refusing to let family sentiment dismantle a policy that had taken months of meticulous legal planning to perfect. She reminded the king, in terms that left no room for debate, that an expiry date on a permanent protocol is not a compromise. It is simply a countdown clock for the next public relations disaster. She argued that if they gave the California camp a 5-year window, they would spend every single day of those 5 years launching media campaigns, writing books, and applying public pressure to ensure that the restriction was lifted when the deadline arrived, and explained that the only way to achieve true peace for the monarchy was to create absolute, irreversible certainty, making it clear to the entire world that the doors of the state were closed, locked, and entirely immune to emotional negotiation. While the internal battle raged within the family, the tactical maneuvering took an even darker turn when Prince William entered the fray with a colder, more clinical certainty than anyone had anticipated. The Prince of Wales had watched the steady erosion of the monarchy's dignity over the past several years with a growing sense of quiet, protective fury, viewing every single concession made to the Montecito camp as a direct threat to the future stability of the throne he is destined to inherit. William reportedly met with the Lord Chamberlain and senior security officials, demanding that the new protocol be reinforced with an absolute zero-tolerance policy regarding unexpected arrivals or private verbal invitations. He insisted that the rules must apply with equal, unbending force even if Meghan arrived on the arm of Harry himself, ensuring that no sudden, emotional grand entrance at a palace gate could trap the institution into a humiliating public spectacle. To ensure that the protocol was legally airtight and entirely insulated from future royal second-guessing, William's legal team insisted on adding a specialized constitutional trapdoor into the reversal process. Any future modification or cancellation of this permanent exclusion order would require a concurrent, tripartite written agreement signed by the reigning sovereign, the direct heir to the throne, and the Lord Chamberlain himself, acting in consultation with the senior officials responsible for ceremonial state standards. This ingenious legal maneuver effectively stripped King Charles of the unilateral power to issue a last-minute royal pardon driven by parental guilt, because any attempt by the king to break the protocol would be instantly blocked by his eldest son's veto power. The machinery of the state had officially outgrown the personal desires of the monarch, creating a legal paradox where a father was structurally prevented from rescuing his own son from the consequences of his choices. Back in California, as the realization of this unbreakable legal cage began to settle over the Duchess, the strategy shifted from private emotional leverage to a high-risk game of international chicken. Meghan's team quietly drafted a massive, comprehensive amended proposal for their attendance at an upcoming national service, a document that was less of a request and more of an ultimatum wrapped in bureaucratic jargon. The proposal demanded an entirely independent, highly specialized security detail provided directly by the state, an isolated arrival route that would keep them completely separated from the Prince and Princess of Wales, and a guaranteed, prominent position within the official program that would signal to the global audience that they were still treated as equals by the institution. It was a bold, desperate attempt to force the palace into a public rejection, setting up a scenario where the Sussexes could claim they were forced to stay away due to a deliberate lack of safety and respect from the royal household. When this amended proposal was transmitted through secure diplomatic channels and landed on Princess Anne's desk, she didn't even bother to pass it along to the king's advisors for a formal review. She reportedly read the document twice, a cold, sardonic smile playing across her face as she recognized the desperate public relations trap for exactly what it was. Without consulting a single public relations consultant or drafting a carefully worded committee response, and took a black pen, wrote a single, unyielding word across the top of the proposal, and ordered her private secretary to transmit it back to California immediately. The word was a definitive, unvarnished refusal that left no room for counter-proposals or future discussions, signaling to the Montecito camp that their days of negotiating with the British state from a position of media leverage were officially over. The rejection hit the California mansion like a physical blow, stripping away the final layers of delusion that had sustained their media strategy for years. Meghan reportedly realized, for the first time, that the old rules of engagement had been completely rewritten by an adversary who simply did not care about social media metrics, Netflix numbers, or Hollywood popularity polls. The palace had successfully retreated behind the ancient, unyielding wall of state protocol, using the very weight of their historic traditions to render her modern public relations weapons completely useless. But as the frustration inside the Montecito war room reached a boiling point, Harry decided to take a step that would catch everyone by surprise, shifting the entire conflict away from legal documents and automated software, and dropping it directly into the realm of raw, face-to-face family confrontation. Harry decided to bypass the digital barriers and the unyielding software blocks by boarding a private flight to London under a cloud of absolute secrecy. He arrived on British soil not as a global celebrity looking for a media spectacle, but as a deeply wounded nephew demanding an explanation from the aunt he had once trusted implicitly. The confrontation did not take place within the formal, echoey corridors of Buckingham Palace where courtiers could eavesdrop from behind every tapestry, but inside a secluded royal residence tucked away from the prying eyes of the press. When Harry walked into the private sitting room, Princess Anne dismissed the last remaining royal aide, closed the double doors herself, and turned to face her nephew with the calm, terrifying poise that had defined her entire public life. The air in the room was thick with years of unspoken resentment, a quiet toxicity that had been building ever since the historic exit to California. Harry refused the chair that was offered to him, standing with his arms tightly crossed as he looked at the woman who had systematically deleted his wife from the public history of the monarchy. He demanded to know if there was any real difference between protecting the ancient crown and executing a calculated, personal vendetta against a woman who had simply refused to conform to their archaic rules. His voice shook with a potent mixture of rage and grief as he explained that this permanent protocol was not just a rejection of Meghan, but a direct, lasting insult to his children, Archie and Lilibet, who were now being raised to see their mother treated as a permanent national security threat by their own flesh and blood. And listened to the emotional barrage without a single interruption, her face an unreadable mask of stoic determination as she waited for the storm to exhaust itself. When Harry finally fell silent, the Princess Royal walked over to a small mahogany table, picked up a heavy, silver-framed family photograph, and turned it toward her nephew, pointing to the ghost-like spaces where they had all once stood together during happier times. She explained, with a controlled firmness that cut through his anger like a scalpel, that the monarchy was a public institution built on the unyielding foundation of constitutional duty, while the family was a private sanctuary of blood and affection. By attempting to merge those two distinct worlds for commercial gain, she warned him, they had created a toxic hybrid that was actively destroying the credibility of the throne. The Princess Royal did not apologize for leaking the protocol shift. Instead, she owned it completely, telling Harry that she was perfectly willing to carry the permanent burden of his hatred if it meant shielding King Charles from the agonizing choice between his duties as a sovereign and his love as a father. She made it brutally clear that marriage could create family ties behind closed doors, but it could not guarantee a permanent, high-visibility role on the global stage of the state for someone who had explicitly rejected the daily, unglamorous public service that supported the crown. In a sudden, devastating moment of absolute clarity, and looked directly into her nephew's eyes and offered him a single, protected path forward. Meghan would remain permanently barred from any event carrying the authority, funding, or branding of the royal household, but the doors to private, non-televised family gatherings would always remain open, provided there were no cameras, no press releases, and no commercial expectations attached. The sheer finality of the compromise broke something deep inside Harry, shifting his posture from defiant anger to a profound, visible grief as he realized that the grand illusion of a triumphant Hollywood royal return was officially dead. He looked at his aunt and realized that the palace had successfully decoupled his identity as a son from his wife's identity as an outsider, leaving him in a position where he could no longer use his royal blood as leverage to secure public visibility for their California brand. Rather than returning to America to launch a furious, media-fueled counter-offensive, Harry made a decision that shocked his own public relations team. He quietly agreed to decline the invitation to the upcoming National Service of Unity, but he explicitly ordered his writers to bury the aggressive, retaliatory statements that had been prepared for the press, choosing instead to honor the cold, protective boundary his aunt had just drawn in the sand. By sunrise the next morning, despite the intense secrecy surrounding the family meeting, the legal architecture of the new protocol leaked completely into the British mainstream media, sending a massive shockwave through the entire nation. Citizens awoke to see front-page headlines dominated by striking, austere images of princess and beneath massive, bold typefaces declaring that the royal doors had been permanently welded shut. Broadcasters immediately dropped their scheduled programming to bring on panels of constitutional experts, royal biographers, and political commentators who argued passionately over whether this clinical exclusion represented an act of necessary institutional strength, or one of calculated family cruelty. The public divide was instantaneous and fierce, with crowds gathering near the Victoria Memorial holding competing, handwritten signs that perfectly captured the national schism, some praising Anne for protecting the crown from a perpetual media circus, while others accused the establishment of conducting a cold-hearted campaign of institutional erasure against a woman who had already stepped away. Palace Communications issued a highly calculated, meticulously worded public statement that confirmed the structural shift without ever sinking to the level of a personal attack or naming the Duchess directly. The official message stated that future attendance at state and ceremonial occasions would be strictly contingent upon active constitutional duty, recognized household status, and official ceremonial responsibility, effectively framing the entire crisis as a neutral, forward-looking clarification designed to streamline operations for future reigns. This clinical restraint was the ultimate tactical maneuver, making the decision appear far larger than a petty family squabble, and establishing it as an unbreakable constitutional precedent that would protect Prince William's future reign from ever being hijacked by transatlantic public relations campaigns or celebrity-seeding disputes. In California, Meghan watched the live British television coverage beside a completely muted screen, staring at the endless loops of palace gates, marching guards, and analytical graphics detailing her permanent removal from the fabric of the state. The initial impulse to launch a multi-platform media blitz, to call up major network anchors, arrange explosive primetime specials, or release a scathing statement accusing the palace of systemic exclusion, was slowly replaced by a heavy, paralyzing realization of finality. She understood, with the sharp instinct of a veteran publicist, that releasing a furious, emotional response at this exact moment would only validate Princess Anne's core argument, proving to the global audience that her presence would always transform a solemn national event into an unstable public battleground. For the first time in years, the strategic calculations failed to yield a loophole, leaving the Montecito camp completely isolated outside the fortress of tradition they had spent years trying to negotiate with. The final act of this historic institutional execution played out within the quiet confines of King Charles's private registry, far away from the screaming headlines and the shouting commentators. Harry sent his father a single, encrypted message that contained no legal demands, no public relations ultimatums, and no threats of media retaliation. It was a simple, private expression of enduring filial affection, explaining that while he could not in good conscience attend the national service of unity without the woman who stood by his side in exile, he would not allow his absence to be weaponized into a public war against the crown. The king read the message in complete isolation, his eyes misting over as he ordered his private secretary to archive the text within his personal correspondence files, ensuring it would remain entirely safe from official government records and public scrutiny. Princess Anne's ruthless, clinical protocol did not achieve the fairy tale ending of a healed family or a grand, emotional reconciliation beneath the palace lights, but it achieved something far more valuable to a centuries-old monarchy. It created absolute, unyielding certainty. The gears of the palace planning computers continued to turn, effortlessly filtering out the noise, the drama, and the perpetual conflict before it could ever touch the steps of the throne. The heavy iron gates of Buckingham Palace did not swing shut in a fit of temporary rage or dramatic vengeance. They closed with the quiet, crushing weight of a constitutional reality that had finally accepted a painful truth. Duty and global celebrity could no longer occupy the same sacred space, and by stepping forward to take the blame, to write the code, and to leak the boundary, the Princess Royal had finally ended the exhausting struggle that had held the British monarchy hostage for an entire generation. The dust has finally settled on the most calculated constitutional eviction in modern history. Princess Anne drew a line in the sand, William reinforced it with titanium, and King Charles signed away his own power to reverse it. It was a cold, clinical, and permanent execution that leaves us with one massive, lingering question. Did the Princess Royal just save the British monarchy from a perpetual media circus, or did she commit the ultimate act of institutional cruelty by locking a family member out forever? Now I want to hear from you. Was Anne completely justified in shielding the crown from constant transatlantic negotiations? Or do you think this ruthless boundary has broken Prince Harry's bond with his family beyond any hope of repair? Drop your thoughts, your theories, and your unfiltered opinions in the comments section below. I read every single one of them. If you want to stay ahead of the game and get the absolute truth behind the palace walls before anyone else, make sure to smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and hit subscribe with notifications turned on. The royal doors are officially closed, but the real fallout is only just beginning. Thank you for watching, keep questioning the narrative, and we will see you in the next shocking update.